My heart was telling me there is no way that I'm not going to speak up for my great aunt. This could be your daughter's, something that's happened in your family. So you have the authorization to speak up about this. And that protective part of me is going to say, I'm bloody well going to speak up about this.
Welcome, Georgina Banks.
Thank you. Lovely to see you both.
Georgina, tell us about a challenge or event that's shaped your journey.
Well, I decided that I was going to write a book, which I'd never done before. I was writing about my great aunt, whose name was Bud, an army nurse in World War II, and killed in this terrible massacre of Australian army nurses. There were 22 of them, but one woman survived. That wasn't my great aunt. So I started to write, and as if that wasn't difficult enough because of the subject matter, I was also really lifting the lid on the culture of silence in my family about the event through generations. About halfway through writing, I found out that what had actually happened was worse again, and that the truth had most likely been censored.
The word that comes to mind, shocking, at the
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
It's multiple forms of meaning. Shocking as in you were shocked, and shocking in the extent to which what was really going on that you didn't know about. How did that impact you when you started to get that sense that this was far worse than you'd ever known or that your family had ever known?
I was unexpectedly invited to attend the 75th anniversary of this massacre. It's called the Bangka Island Massacre, or sometimes called the Raji Beach Massacre. So it's on this remote island in Indonesia. I knew that my great aunt had been killed in this massacre, but I hadn't really engaged a lot with the story. And there was a culture of family silence, as I've already said. So I actually went, and I was found unexpectedly through a blog that I'd written for my work, because I've got a consulting business, and I'd written this blog about resilience, ironically, and posted it on LinkedIn. And I'd just mentioned my great aunt's name once in passing. I got this email from this historian in New Zealand who'd found me from that blog. He'd had a Google alert out. Initially, I was responding out of this sense of curiosity and almost like a sense of adventure that drew me to go. And this idea that I could go and finish this family business of tending to a bud, because of course she'd never had a funeral. So there was a sense that that hadn't been done in our family. So I set off, and as I started writing, it was almost like I was very much writing about something that happened in the past. There was a distance, I guess, between me and the story. I came back from the 75th anniversary, and then a day or two later, there was an article online written by a journalist called Tess Lawrence saying that Vivian Bullwinkle, who was the sole survivor, and there's actually a statue of her at the War Memorial now, so she's a very well-known national figure, that Vivian had confided in Tess Lawrence that prior to the massacre, most of the nurses had been sexually violated, and that Vivian had wanted to include this in her testimony at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal in 1946, but that she was ordered not to by the Australian government. I felt absolutely devastated. Exactly what you're saying. It was so shocking. You know, when you watch a war movie, and it's those ones that are sort of very heroic and they have a heroic narrative, and there's almost a sense of this mythological death in a way that they almost transform the death, or they manage to rise above it. There was that sense. And that for me really shattered, and I was left with these jagged pieces of glass. And it very much brought it into the present moment and the violence and the absolute horrific nature of war crimes, which I think we can all relate to at the moment. They're not just something that's happened in the past. Unfortunately, they're happening again globally. And that very much came to the fore for me. So everything changed for me in that moment.
Was that the point you'd already chosen to write the book? You were writing it from a perspective of curiosity and honouring your aunt, and a piece of bringing your aunt's history forward. And then this really shocking, confronting piece of information. How did you then cope? How did that unfold for you?
I became really determined to find, because of course this was one person speaking out in the media. You couldn't say it was a proven fact, and no one else had ever spoken about it before. I found out once I started digging into this that a Japanese war crimes academic called Yuki Tanaka had suggested that it may have happened. Another woman, Barbara Angel, had put together all this information about the uniform. So there were a few things that other people had claimed in a similar vein. But I did become really determined because I was already writing about this. I felt it was my moral, ethical responsibility. And I felt so determined to find out if this actually was true or not. Not that I was disbelieving Tess, but obviously you've got to have proof beyond reasonable doubt. So I became very determined to find out if it was true or not. And I had to grapple with it. I couldn't just go, oh, I don't want to deal with this. But I often felt that internally. I don't want to grapple with war crimes and whether they're true or not. Who am I to be weighing into this domain? But I couldn't really do that and write the book that I wanted to write. I couldn't ignore it. So I was faced with this real dilemma on so many levels. And the other thing is I just felt so grief-stricken by it all, which really surprised me. I mean, I can actually feel it now. I've mainly processed it. That really caught me off guard, that I would feel like that. I was struggling on so many levels.
Georgina, there's absolutely two worlds you would have been living in. One as a researcher to find the facts and the truth and to be able to write that book as accurately as possible. But then there's that very personal, the very part of you that's struck by this. It was hard enough information in the first place, the fact that she was murdered. But the second part was to find this next layer. Tell us more about that for you and the grief. I mean, I can't even start to imagine how you managed that.
It was so surprising is the word. What I started to understand was that it was this sense of intergenerational grief that I was dealing with, that because it hadn't been processed in the family, it was very much sitting there. What I realised was that my grandmother, Jean, who was Bud's only sibling and older sister, when she was alive, she never even mentioned her sister's name to me, not even once. So there was just this total shutdown. And, you know, my grandmother had to be very stoic. She also lost her husband a few years after, so she had to get on, and obviously that was very much what that generation did, and I think she did that by pushing it all down and burying it. Then you go to my dad and my Aunt Sally, and my Aunt Sally had become custodian of all things related to Bud. And she told me that when she was a little girl, she remembers that there was this picture sitting on the wall, which is this really enigmatic army enlistment photo of Bud. And she's quite dashing, and she's a real character. She's kind of kooky and very out there. And she's in this photo and she's got her army hat on, and it's very like, oh, you know. So there was that photo, and Sally as a little girl used to look at that photo, and it was in her grandparents' cottage in this little rural town in Cheshunt in the King Valley in Victoria. And she remembers it being quite ominous. And somehow she knew as a little girl that she wasn't supposed to talk about that person or ask any questions. And likewise, she knew that there was this rattan box that sat on the dresser of my grandparents' cottage that later she found out contained all of Bud's letters. And similarly, she knew that she wasn't supposed to read those letters or open that box. And it wasn't until she was about 40 and Jean, her mother and my grandmother, was in hospital that she got up the courage to actually open that box and read all of those letters. And she said that she felt she was both finding and losing her aunt at the same time. So that's how powerful that silence was in our family. And it wasn't that my Aunt Sally and my dad wouldn't talk about it. It's just that they weren't in the practice of doing it. There was no family culture of doing it. So what happened was, when I got invited to this service on the beach, I really wanted my father to come. I wanted my aunt to come. My father said to me, no, I don't want to open old wounds.
Yeah.
So that was his response, understandable for a lot of reasons. He was in the Navy himself and in the Vietnam War. And then my Aunt Sally really wanted to come, but she couldn't because she's quite disabled. She would have needed a wheelchair on the beach. Before I left, she handed me these letters, like, I'm passing this to you. You be the custodian of this story and please do something with this family grief. She didn't say that, but later on when I said to her, why do I feel so grief-stricken? She said, well, the grief has been passed to you.
Oh. Through your father and Sally's journey, you were carrying their grief as well as your own.
Yes,
and
yes.
That would have been incredibly difficult.
It really was. And it was funny. I was talking to my business partner this morning and she said to me, oh, you're not as sad anymore. And I thought, oh, gosh, that's a really interesting reflection. I said, yeah, because I'm not sitting with war crimes every day and reading these devastating research documents and imagining what it was like and then interacting with that material to write a book.
How did you navigate that intergenerational grief, Georgina? You've got to sit with it. You've got to express it. So how did you do that?
I let myself feel it. I've got a background in psychology and in acting. I'm good at embodying things. I know how to sit with things, although I don't always, obviously. Sometimes I want to bounce out of them and run away. And I did run away a lot of times. But at some level, I sat with it, and it took me 5 years to write it and research it, part-time because I'm running my business as well. Some of it was during COVID. So in some ways it was a perfect COVID project. Apart from the fact I had a daughter doing VCE at the dining room table and another one upstairs doing uni in an open plan house, and everyone's like, shut up, shut up, shut up. Anyway, I would sit on the sofa and it just felt like this lead ball inside me, this grief really weighing me down. And that's how I physically experienced it. And I just cry. I just let myself express it. It is incredibly devastating and sad. But also I had a vehicle for it. I could put it into my creativity, into the writing, and into something that I really wanted to do in my writing. I wrote it as a dual narrative. So I write about the last 48 hours of Bud and the other women's lives. It's dramatised history. So I'm imagining how they felt and what they were doing on the beach. They actually fled Singapore as it fell to Japanese imperial forces on a ship, and the ship was bombed and sunk. So they'd already survived that, and then they wash up on this beach. So because it was such difficult material, I wanted to bring Bud to life in all her fabulousness and the character that she is, and very much the living her, not just the dead trauma. And I also really wanted to write in quite a poetic way, so that I would be surrounding the darkness with beauty and lyricism. I included a lot of her letters. There's a lot of her voice and her narrative in her letters. That creativity gave me an outlet for the grief. That's how I processed it myself. I also had counselling, which was incredibly helpful as a way of processing it and understanding it. And I can't remember if it was a counsellor or if it was me just doing my own research, was saying that it's, that sense of ambiguous loss where the grief gets frozen. In this case, she was missing for so long, and there's this terrible series of telegrams that I have saying that she's missing. It's not till 1944 that they get one saying that she's believed to have been killed. And then the next day they get another one saying, oh, sorry, there was an error in the wording, and they put her as missing, believed killed. So reinserting that word missing just opens up for my great-grandmother this idea that maybe one day she would come back.
Yeah, hope.
To the cottage in Cheshunt. And apparently no one was ever allowed to talk during the 12:30 news, the midday news on the radio back then, the wireless, as they called it, because they were listening for any news about the nurses. And of course, that's how they got their main news.
You're dealing with the loss. Then at what point did it come out that there was in fact murder? At what point did the family deal with that next layer of grief?
Well, that wasn't until after the war had ended, and the nurses there were 65 nurses who were on that ship, and some of them were killed when the boat was bombed and sunk, around 12. Another 21 were killed in the massacre. And so then the remaining ones were in the camps. And you may have seen that film Paradise Road.
Yeah.
About the singing. That's that same group of nurses, the ones who are in the camp. At the end of the war, some of them died really from starvation and disease and malnutrition. 24 of them came home, including Vivian Bullwinkle, who had survived the massacre and the camps. And so that's when the story came out about what had actually happened. That's a few years after the massacre, because the massacre happened on the 16th of February 1942.
Right in the middle of the war, where there's so much trauma going on for the whole world back then. Every other family was probably waiting for that telegram saying my son, daughter, brother, sister is missing. So you can see how that non-disclosure of grief, why should I grieve? Everybody else is grieving. But that doesn't make that easy for your family.
Exactly.
But the hope for your grandmother was that Bud was one day going to walk back in that door. Georgina, did you get a sense or a feeling, particularly of your father and Sally's grief while you were experiencing it? Did they then open up and talk about it more while you were writing the book and dealing with it?
That was really difficult. I felt like I was balancing so many sensitivities. And that was one of the hardest things for me to balance. So I'm balancing my aunt, Sally, and my dad's sensitivities, which I'll come back to. And I'm also balancing all these other relatives that I start to then know because I've met some of them. So relatives of the other nurses who were killed. And everybody obviously has different opinions and different vulnerabilities and different beliefs about what should and shouldn't be uncovered and spoken about. In terms of Sally and Dad, Sally wanted to talk about it, and she really did start to open up about how it had impacted her and that sense of over stoicism in their family where things were pushed down. And so there is an emotional toughness, might be the wrong word, but just an over stoicism where you don't talk about those sorts of things. My father, he didn't want to talk about it. So I had to respect that. He did start to open up a little bit. Occasionally I'd send him something or I'd ask him a question, and then he might send me an email saying he remembered Vivian Bullwinkle coming to visit Jean and his grandparents. He was a little boy, so he doesn't remember much, but he could remember the general sadness because they hadn't heard anything. He would send me these little tidbits, but I had to be really careful how much I spoke to him about it. I know Mum was getting really worried about me. It's not her family. She was like, oh, you're way too deep with this. Not that she told me that, but I found out later. I got it published with Penguin, Random House in the end. And then I thought, oh gosh, I've got to show it to my dad and Sally before it gets published. What are they going to think? I was so nervous. I thought, it's their story. I'm the one who's been given it. I've taken it up. So how are they going to respond to this? And how are they going to respond to what I've written about them in the book as well? Because they're in the book. The first half of it's written from my perspective. So there's a vulnerability of mine and of my family in the book as well. And I thought, I'm going to give it to Sally first because she's the one that wanted this to happen. She said to me, oh, I couldn't stop crying when I read this book and I stayed up all night and read it. And she said, thank you for writing this, George. Now I feel a sense of peace. So that was such a beautiful response to get. I felt incredibly proud or just satisfied that she felt I'd done it justice. And I said to her, look, I can change your name. It doesn't have to be your name in this book. And she said, oh, I stayed up all night thinking about whether I should have my name in it or not. And she said, no, I'm going to have my name in it. And then I thought, oh no, I've got to send it to Dad. What's he going to say? Oh, he's very into literature. So the whole thing of actually trying to write a decent book is a whole other endeavour, having never been a writer before. I gave it to him, nervously waited, and he read it in a day. He sent me a text and it said, good job, George. I was like, oh, that's high praise from my father. Okay. And then he said, but by the way, drains do not go anti-clockwise in the Southern Hemisphere. And then the other piece of feedback he sent me was, it's not the HMAS, whatever the ship was, it's HMAS. And I thought, gee, I've got off really lightly if that's the main feedback he's got for me.
I was going to say, if that's the only 2 points that he made, Georgina, that's pretty amazing.
I know. I was like, oh, happy to change those. Thanks for the feedback.
Obviously, you were sitting in the grief in that process, and
Yeah.
you got help with a counsellor, and you used a lot of your own techniques to move through that. But once you'd found a way to write and to really represent Bud's story, did that parallel how you were coping? Was it almost cathartic, put what you were going through into her story, and what happened as you'd written it?
Yes, absolutely. I was writing all the time and researching. There's so much research in this book. I've made so many trips to the National Archives. Luckily, those documents are actually held in the archives in Melbourne, and the War Memorial, and searching and writing and processing it all at the same time. So it was always cathartic. I mean, that's a great gift of creativity. I mean, when I was an actor, same, now being a writer, you can take a life experience and the act of creativity is cathartic. It's so cathartic. There's other aims. Obviously, you can't just vomit out your emotions and then that's not a book. But part of the process is that you do get to do that, and then you can mold and shape it in a way that's going to work for the reader. So that's the great gift. Actually, you can transform something. It was a way of processing this huge part of my family history.
Yeah. So at the end, when you got to that point and you'd handed it to Sally and handed it to your father, where were you sitting emotionally with the story? How had that changed for you?
I don't know if it had changed. I think it's changed now because I've got some distance from it. I think all the way through, I was always grappling, always really fearful about what was going to happen, putting this out in the public arena. Was I doing justice to these women? Very determined to speak up on behalf of my great aunt and the other women more broadly, really determined about having their full uncensored story told, and really paranoid about, have I got enough? Is there enough evidence? Have I done all the research properly? What are all the other relatives going to think? What are the sort of complex moral and ethical responsibilities around all of this? Is it more merciful to speak up or stay silent, especially when it relates to historic war crimes? So I was grappling all the way through with all of that. I have more peace around it now because there has been more evidence that's come out by another war historian. But there's still detractors and naysayers. I've been sitting with all of that and grappling with that for years.
Obviously, that was a lot of the head, the thinking through, the research, representing people. So it's all very much cerebral. But what was your heart telling you throughout that process?
Because of what was going on, it was during the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm.
And my heart was telling me, there is no way that I'm not going to speak up for my great aunt. So my heart's telling me, this could be your daughter's, something that's happened in your family. So you have the authorization to speak up about this. And that protective part of me is going to say, I'm bloody well going to speak up about this. And I'm going to say what happened and stand up for these women, especially my great aunt, who's the one I'm really authorised to stand up for. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's a sense of justice at this point in history, is having that full story written in a narrative form and by a relative.
Mm. How much did that heart component help you through what sounds to me as though a very heavy weight of making sure this story and the people were represented in the way they needed to be?
It really helped me, absolutely. That's the main thing that was driving me, a sense of justice and giving full voice, but full humanity to my aunt. That's what drove me all the way through. Because if you had have said to me, oh, in the future, you're going to write a book about war crimes and sexual violence and other violence as well, by the way, and put it out there, I'd be like, there is no way I'm going to do that. Forget it. I'm not that person. I'm too much of a scaredy cat to do that. No way. So it was the passion that drove me, the passion for justice, the passion for speaking up.
And it sounds like that passion was also what pulled you or pushed you through those many fears? Was there any
absolutely.
point, Georgina, that you felt like you couldn't go on? Was there any overwhelming or one particular fear that was stronger than the others, or were they equal voices in your head?
I knew I had my own family on side. I think that was really important. They thought that, it's obviously really difficult, but it's better for this to come out. And it was already out anyway in the media. I was just looking into it more and writing a whole book about it. I was really afraid of what some of the other relatives might say, because there are a couple, not the relatives who died on the beach, but the relatives who survived the camp. There's a couple of strong voices for milking the story. So that's really hard. I really grappled with that. And I felt just incredibly vulnerable. And yeah, what can I say? I felt very vulnerable. I felt very nervous about that because there's lots of events that you get invited to. And I do have a lot of supporters as well. I think by nature, I am a peacemaker. I am quite a diplomatic personality. So I was consulting a lot with the other relatives. What did they think? Would they support me if I wanted to do a freedom of information? Consulting with the relatives of the nurses who were killed on the beach that I knew. And most of them said yes. In the end, I just thought, there's no way I can please them all because there's just too many with different opinions. I have to go with what I think is right and what I initially set out to do. I'm pretty convinced. I think if it went to court now, we'd get a beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, there'll be people who disagree with me. I'm pretty convinced it happened, and I think it's really important, and a mature nation can have these nuanced stories and grapple with difficult history and not just have one note. They were so brave, they were so brave. They walked towards the water, heads held high. None called out or cried for mercy. And then a machine gun opened fire and shot them all, which obviously is awful enough, but is a sort of transcendent death. That was the word I was looking for before, as though they didn't feel that death. So to shatter that, it's difficult. Of course it's difficult. And I can even understand the detractors, even though I don't agree with them. I think in a way they are protecting themselves, and it's a bit of a misguided sense of trying to protect their own aunts.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, your family did that, didn't they, Georgina? Because they didn't talk about it. They needed to protect themselves.
Yeah, good point. I hadn't thought of that.
They're just doing the same in protecting themselves because nobody would want to see that truth.
Yeah.
Nobody. Who in their right mind would want to know that that happened to so many women that were there being of service to their country, and yet they were so badly treated and then murdered?
Exactly.
It's interesting that I keep sensing that there was a really core driver in that passion that actually transcended your word, but transcended your own fear.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting what you just said. I'll come back to that. You're right. So about my family did that too. In some ways, it's a healthy defense mechanism. And I think what I was dealing with, what I was and still am dealing with, is that people then project that onto me in anger. How dare you? You're wrong. This didn't happen. You're trying to milk it. So that's really helpful. Thank you, Anne. That also helps me to think about it in a different way. Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether you, at some level, sense that. So whether it was more of a heartfelt sense and a conscious sense. It seemed like there was a turning point, the fear of what would the other nurses' relatives say, but you realising that this story just really needed to be told. You had that very strong piece of justice driving you forward because this story needs to be told.
I can't crystallise a moment when that happened, but I think it was happening on multiple levels. And I just think that sense of justice. I've got 2 daughters. The Me Too movement was in full swing, and I just couldn't stay silent. I mean, I had enough inner strength that I could do it. And I think because it's not my personal experience, I wasn't speaking from a point of vulnerability in that I was traumatizing myself. I can take this up on behalf of my aunt and the other women because I haven't experienced this myself, and I can cocoon myself or steel myself enough to push through these fears, some of which are probably me catastrophizing a bit, although they are also real fears. And sometimes it's hard to know, pull those things apart.
I'm blown out, Georgina, how you were able to sit in the two spaces, is carrying the grief of your family and the shockingness of what you found out, but at the same time have the presence to be able to write such a compelling and important story in Australian history. Your business partner, you said earlier, had said that you were not as teary now as you were.
Yes.
So from this exact moment now, how do you view that actual period of time?
I actually view it as an incredible period of time. I know that I've spoken about the challenges and the difficulties, but it was also a great gift to discover that I love writing. I used to love writing when I was a kid and when I was at school, and loved writing essays, and then I was an actor. So story and synthesizing information has always been part of me, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. I had no idea. You know, I used to sort of wander around and say, oh, maybe I'll write a book one day, but I thought it'd be more related to my work. Although it was incredibly painful and difficult, it was really meaningful to me. I'm incredibly pleased that I've done it. And I discovered this great gift of writing. So I feel as though I've gained a lot from doing it. I've had this great gift.
Georgina, you mentioned that, your aunt was grateful, but have you noticed any shift in your family's perspective or your family's approach to grief and dealing with this experience now that you've finished the book?
I'm not going to say everything's fabulous and we've all changed, but I think there's some different conversations in our family that have opened up, and my father has become a little bit more open in talking about some of his experiences. Definitely my aunt and I have had some pretty incredible conversations. So there has been a shift. There's been healing. Healing is the word. There's been healing in our family in regards to that. And there's some closure. It's like that family business has now been done. It's been tended to. It can sort of rest. Yeah, it feels like it can rest.
And do you talk about Bud now, apart from the book and the journey?
Yeah, she does. She does come up. Often it's in relation to the book. They'll say, oh, so-and-so read your book and they really enjoyed it. So it's often in that context. But absolutely, she feels like somebody who is integrated into our family. In fact, we're fundraising to create a statue of her and another woman who weirdly is from the same tiny town,
wow.
Cheshunt. Yeah. Who was on the same boat, Caroline Ennis. A group of women read my book and they were from that area, and they decided, we really want to do something. She's like, these two were like our local heroes. So let's fundraise and create these, bronze busts that will sit at the cenotaph. So we're doing that at the moment.
Wow.
Lovely gift that you're giving, not just the book, but the being proud of these women, and instead of just putting it under the carpet and not disclosing the truth of the story. And because of that, these women could never be recognised for actually what they did, and all of a sudden they are. It's such a gift, that in its own right, Georgina, to those women, to all of the women. Yes,
I'd love for there to be a statue of all of them, all of those women around Australia.
Yeah.
But there is obviously Vivian at the War Memorial, and it's the first statue of a woman in war. And then there's our statues, which will be in Oxley at the cenotaph, which is in rural Victoria.
You going through this process is quite amazing. We've unpacked that a little bit, but what, if any, changes have you noticed in yourself as a result of this whole process?
I think I'm braver. I don't normally use that word about myself, but I am. I'm more able to hold my ground. I can withstand the criticism. I don't like it, but I can tolerate it. So I think I'm stronger than I thought I was in that regard. And I can just let it slide off me in a way and go, does it really matter? Someone's not talking to me. okay, they're not talking to me. That's okay. I know why I did this. I'm proud of the fact I've done it. I really wanted to do it. I believe in what I've done, and there's a price to pay, and I'll pay it. But I'm not going to crumple. I'm not going to crumble as a result of what other people want to project.
Wow. And so what would Georgina before the book have done with criticism versus how do you handle criticism differently post-book?
I would absolutely have agonized over every little piece of criticism and consulted a million people and what should I do, and turned myself inside out to try to make it better. Or maybe I would have let it thwart me and stop me from doing things, or I would have overly tried to make up with that person. So now I don't do that so much.
What do you do instead?
That's their stuff. If they don't want to believe what we found, then that's fair enough. They say there's not enough evidence. Okay, that's fine. I can tolerate that. But the stuff about attacking me, I'm just not taking that on board. It's so unfair. It's just projection. It's just real shoot the messenger stuff.
It sounds to me, though, Georgina, that what you've actually done is that you've sat in your clarity and intention of why you did what you did, and that ownership of knowing the clear purpose of it.
Absolutely. The purpose, and yes, the clarity of purpose. And there's some sort of spiritual sense for me. I can't really articulate it, driving me right through. And so I felt like I responded to that. So that's a very much a deeper purpose than a few slings and arrows coming my way.
And all of those women right
all of
behind
those
you.
all of those women right behind me. I did this event at a writers' festival, and this woman came up to me afterwards, really great, lovely comment. She said, when you were talking, I could see these generations of women in your family standing beside you. My goodness, that's an amazing comment. Thank you for saying that.
That's a real goosebump moment.
Yeah, I've got all these women around me and beside me, so that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And my daughters in front of me.
Georgina, has anything shifted for you as a mother of daughters, throughout that process?
No, I've always been a fairly fierce protector of my daughters. There's other things I've advocated for on their behalf. But I think they're really pleased that I've done it. We're going to be in I can't say what it is, but we are going to be in a TV thing, and my daughters are going to be in it next year about all of this. And I said, will you be in this? And they're like, oh, we don't know what to say. So it'll be really interesting to see how they approach that, and how they actually hear from them, how they have actually processed it and what it means to them. They've both read the book, and they're both real feminists, so they're very on board with all the speaking up for women. But it will be really interesting to hear how they perceive it, being obviously another generation, very young contemporary women. They're both in their 20s.
That will be most fascinating, because this generation that's coming through now, our leaders of tomorrow, certainly don't want to tolerate the lack of disclosure and the lack of transparency.
Yeah. Funnily enough, because when I started writing, they were quite young, and my youngest said something like, because of course, when I started writing, no one apart from me thought I was ever going to get published. I didn't know either, but I was hoping I was going to get published. So I'd be sitting here typing away, and Freddie, my youngest, would say, oh, it's a really good project for someone your age, Mum. Thanks. And then my eldest daughter's boyfriend told me afterwards, he'd come over and he'd say, oh gosh, I felt really sorry for you because you were putting so much effort into this book that none of us thought was ever going to get published. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. I'm glad you didn't tell me all of that at the time.
It sounds so much though, Georgina, that yes, it was an important end result, but the journey that it took you through and your family through and all of those other families was really the gold. That was what was so important, to find out the truth. So you probably wouldn't have thought, yes, it'd be nice to get it published, but at that time you were in the middle of doing the purpose of what you were doing.
Yes, exactly. There was a higher purpose for it all that was not related to being published. So, but it's just really interesting to see their perspective on it.
Oh, Georgina, well, we could keep on talking forever. It's been an absolute delight to hear that your strength and courage has made such a difference in the world, and your purpose and passion has managed to transform a story of a very sad, traumatic story into one that perhaps has helped some generational healing. As you said, it's shown the next generation, your daughters, the power of you having that strength and purpose and belief in yourself and belief in your story. It has been such an honour to have you join us, bringing to light this story, healing generational trauma, having your own back at times.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of topics there, but what message would you give your 10-year-old self, knowing that this was what was ahead?
In the future, you're going to speak up about war crimes. Crazy idea, I know. But I think what I would really tell her is that you are going to be able to withstand the criticism, and you are going to be able to become a good enough writer to write this book. So I was always a real perfectionist as a kid. I know we haven't had a chance to explore that for another time. I think I'd also say to her, just try to let go of some of that perfectionism and just get into the messiness of life.
What a great message. What has been the greatest gift of this experience?
So the greatest gift is that I've received the gift of writing in my life, and I will write another book at some point. And the other thing that I've received is the privilege of being able to speak up for my great aunt and these women. And I feel like there's some historical accountability that will last. The book is a permanent thing, and I'm really proud and pleased that I was able to do that, and to do it in a poetic way that adds some beauty around all of that suffering.
Wow. And so our final wrap-up question is, what would be your top 3 tips for others?
Yeah, I've got so many. So many.
Feel free to give us
I'll
more than 3.
I'm trying to. I think the first one is that hard things are hard. You've heard me talk about the grief, but I wouldn't swap it for anything. So if you want to do something difficult, and I encourage people to do hard things, you have to steel yourself. And I don't mean that in the sense of being tough or impenetrable, but I guess a steely backbone, but still with vulnerability. And when it does get hard, don't back away from it or take that as a sign that you shouldn't be doing it. Because I think often we think, oh, it's getting really hard. Maybe this is a sign that I'm not good enough at this, or I shouldn't be in this space. Stay. So I encourage people to stay the course, and you just have to learn to tolerate discomfort. You don't have to like it, but in the same way that I had to sit in that grief and let it passed through me, and it did pass through me. I know I've been a bit teary today, but it's not a permanent state, if that makes sense. It's like a river that passes through you, and anyone who's practiced mindfulness will know about that. The second one is that, for me, the opposite of fear is not bravery, it's passion. So I think you both made that comment that it was my passion that was the opposing force to fear, and that sense of purpose, passion and purpose, that enabled me to push through the fear. So the passion for justice for my great aunt and justice for women, and the passion for giving voice to their full story. And the third, well, there's a few more, but I'll just give you one more. To quote Brené Brown, who's quoting Roosevelt about that famous speech about the man in the arena, I think, if you want to do something, you can't sit in the stands and say, in the future, I'll realize my potential, or just sit there and be either jealous of other people or critical. You just have to get down there, and you have to get your hands dirty, and you have to get into the mess. And I just love this quote. This is Roosevelt's speech. It's not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I love that.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
You're welcome to squeeze in a fourth one if you've
Oh,
got a
okay.
fourth
All
tip.
right. Okay. Well, the other one is growth mindset. That's such an amazing concept. Carol Dweck, for most people know it, but if you don't know it, Google Carol Dweck. She's an incredible professor at Harvard. Because I had to learn to write. If you're in a fixed mindset, you're always looking, am I a good writer or not? Do I have the talent to do this or not? This sort of binary black or white thinking. I had to be my own experiment. I teach this stuff, so then I had to apply it to myself, which was really interesting actually. But if I had have approached my writing with a fixed mindset, if I was always asking myself the question, am I a good writer? The answer would have always been no. When I started out, of course I wasn't a good writer. I hadn't practiced. I hadn't learnt the craft. I hadn't put in my 10,000 hours. I hadn't received feedback, all of that. I think changing the question was really helpful for me. I never asked myself, am I a good writer? I only ever asked myself the question, how do I become a good enough writer? And that just opened up this fun world of learning and workshopping and curiosity and trying to get myself into a writing group with people who are way better than me so I could soak it in from them and drag myself up to their level. That was such a blessing. I don't think I could have written the book without taking on. So thank you, Carol Dweck, for all your amazing work.
Oh, thank you, Georgina. It is so inspiring to hear your story, to hear the struggles, to hear the fact that your purpose has just been such a driver, and what a gift to your family, what a gift to Bud and all those other women who's had your voice to bring their voice forward and have that voice on behalf of other women. So it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege having you with us today, and thank you for everything that you have done, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you, Anne.
Okay, that's our episode for today of What's Fear Got to Do with It. Thanks so much for your company. We hope you found it insightful and it left you with some helpful tips from our guests and some great points for you to reflect on. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Substack or follow us on your favourite platform and leave a review. We'd love to know your thoughts. Maybe you'd like to be a guest or you know someone who you would like to hear their story. Reach out to us on Insta at whatsfear_podcast or email us at info@whatsfear.com. All the guests' show notes are below, and until next time, from Jo and I, take care, stay curious and keep the conversation going.